"Shut up, old broad. Maid should stay quiet." Snarled at by my sister-in-law, I froze in terror. I'd never seen a woman spit out such foul language, grabbing me by my collar like a man, since I became an adult. She was a problem for both her parents and my husband. I'd hoped she'd settled down once married. My name's Helen, a 35-year-old housewife. Ever since we got married 5 years ago, we've been living with my in-laws. They're good people, and considering I was also working at the time, they'd help me with the housework. My husband Chris, same age as me, and my father-in-law also helped out. We were all there for each other. We'd chosen to live together because it's how our parents had lived, and they suggested we could do the same. I know a lot of women wouldn't be fond of living with their in-laws, but I had grown up in a family of 12, and the thought of living alone made me feel lonely. So I was actually happy when the suggestion was made. My in-laws were very likable, and I wished we could continue living happily, but a sad event occurred. My mother-in-law was injured outdoors and had to be hospitalized. She had had a heart attack on her way down some stairs and fell while in pain. The heart disease made her very frail. After that, I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. While visiting my mother-in-law in the hospital and doing the housework, I was grateful that my father-in-law and Chris were there to support me. In the midst of all this, my sister-in-law, Sarah, came back. Sarah had always been the black sheep of the family. She's 33 now, working part-time in a clothing store and supposedly doing some night work as well. Before we got married, my father-in-law had said to her, "If life is too tough, you can live with us." But she had flatly refused. "I can't do whatever I want if I live at home," so she'd said, and troubled my in-laws, because she'd always been irresponsible. In school, she'd fought with her teachers and caused trouble for my mother-in-law. She had conflicts with classmates and even had an affair with a married man during her college years, caused a big problem involving his wife. According to my mother-in-law, Sarah had been a very honest and kind person. However, because her hair was naturally blonde, and also she has an attractive appearance, she'd faced hardship in school due to stereotypical prejudice against blonde women. That's how it started, and she had become jaded. Especially in middle school, the situation was severe. Her teachers looked down on her even though she had done nothing wrong. Feeling that she'd be criticized regardless, Sarah's behavior and grades were gradually getting worse. I understand the situation as I had also attended a strict school. One of my friends had natural blonde hair and faced difficulty. My friend was very sensitive and would look down when scolded by teachers, so I often stood up for her. I always protested against teachers who judge people by their appearance. After that, stubborn teachers in my school gradually began to change their attitudes. She must have grown up with her heart wounded, so I hoped she could relax while living in our in-laws' house. I knew she was worried about her hospitalized mother, so I decided to take her to the hospital with me. I was mistaken to have thought so. As Sarah walked into our family home, she looked at me and without even saying hello said, "Oh, are you the housekeeper? I'd love some tea." Immediately, my father-in-law raised his voice in anger. "Sarah, apologize to Helen. She's Chris's wife. She's not the housekeeper." "Eh? She seems so plain. And she's not even pretty. I thought she was a housekeeper on the job. Chris, you have terrible taste in women." Anger began to stir within me, but I decided to respond maturely, and I flashed Sarah a smile. "Hello, Sarah. I'm Helen, Chris's wife. Remember, we met at our wedding?" Now that you mention it, wedding dresses are amazing, aren't they? They can make even someone like you look somewhat pretty." Again, my father-in-law's voice echoed throughout the room. "Sarah, that's enough." Surprised by his voice, Chris came down from the second floor. He too seemed to have had his share of problems with Sarah in the past. Before Chris and I got married, he lent her some money. Not only did she never pay him back, but she also told him, "Listen to what your sister says because you're my brother." They've been at odds ever since, always glaring at each other. Even after that, Sarah continued her terrible behavior. Without inquiring about her mother's condition, she just kept barking orders at me. "Hey, housekeeper, make some tea quickly. Also, bring out some snacks. When I come home, you should be ready immediately, shouldn't you?" The one who glared at her with stern eyes was Chris. "Helen isn't a housekeeper. If you keep talking like that, you'll have to leave. Weren't you supposed to be worried about Mom?" "Mom? She's in the hospital, right? Shouldn't the doctors be taking care of her?" "But if you don't see her, how would you know what's going on? How much she's suffering from her illness? What kind of injury she sustained? Besides, Mom has always been worried about you, Sarah. Wouldn't it be nice if you showed her your lively face? With a sigh, Sarah responded, I'm not interested in the women who gave birth to me as a blonde woman. My father-in-law got up and shouted, Your mother isn't to blame. Do you know how many times your mother cleaned up your mess? How much love she has poured into you? Have you ever thought about how I feel? No one understands the feelings of being whispered about, being seen differently when you're a child. Oh, I shouldn't have come. I just came to talk about getting engaged, and it's seriously annoying. Sarah looked as if time had stopped in her rebellious phase. As she headed towards the front door to leave, I chased after her. Congratulations on your engagement, Sarah. Ignoring my words, she tried to leave, but I continued. Are you really not going to visit your mother? That's when Sarah stopped in her tracks. You're so annoying. I just came to talk about my engagement to a rich man. I see. I apologize. Oh, you've found an amazing man. But remember, jobs don't determine a person's worth. Of course, I admire people who save lives and support livelihoods. I respect those who provide places for people to enjoy. Even housewives who might not make money but work tirelessly for their families are valuable. Every job in this world serves a purpose for people. So don't judge people by their jobs. Your father and Chris are your family. Don't look down on them. As soon as I said this, Sarah's face changed. With a look of deep hatred, she glared at me. The next thing I knew, she grabbed my collar. I was engulfed in a chill, like a jolt of electricity. Shut up, you old hag. Housekeepers should keep their mouths shut. Fear overwhelmed me. My heart felt as if it had shrunk, causing a painful sensation in my chest. I tried to yell, but no voice came out. I was so scared that I shut my eyes. Then I felt Sarah's hand slip away from my chest, and a sigh of relief escaped me. I'm bringing my fiancé over next week. Act like a proper housekeeper and stay in the corner. Sarah spouted off before slamming the door shut with a loud bang. I hoped her aggressive demeanor would mellow out once she got married. That's what I thought to myself. 3 days later, something happened. As I was walking around the neighborhood to go shopping, I saw a little girl in the park. She looked about the age to start elementary school, her face covered by her hands, crying loudly. What's wrong, sweetheart? I lost my mom, she replied. I too was quite mischievous when I was younger, often running around and getting separated from my parents. My siblings would always find me during those times. Where did you get lost? I don't know. After asking her name, I held her hand and began loudly calling for her mother as we walked around. Luckily, we found her mother quickly. The woman thanked me with tears in her eyes. On closer inspection, I recognized her as an old classmate. Emma, is that you? Wait, are you Helen Wilson? Wilson is my maiden name. Hearing it after such a long time brought back memories. I can't believe the mother of the lost child is you, Emma. I'm truly sorry for the trouble. My daughter was chasing a bird, and I lost sight of her. Thank you so much. After sharing a laugh, we decided that running into each other was fate and exchanged contact information, promising to grab a coffee sometime. We had been in the same class, but not in the same group, so we didn't interact much. But now that we're adults, I feel like we might have gotten along well, even back then. The next day, I went to a cafe with Emma. She too is a housewife, and her daughter is currently in kindergarten. As we chatted about our childhood and recent events, time just flew by. As the conversation turned to the topic of marriage, Emma looked somewhat distressed. My older brother is finally getting married, but I'm a bit worried. The girl he's marrying was known as a delinquent around our neighborhood. Maybe she's become a better person if your brother wants to marry her? I hope so. By the way, did you know that my brother had a crush on you, Helen? I was shocked. What? Well, we weren't in the same grade, right? You were pretty popular, Helen. Everyone had a crush on you. Did you know that even the guy I had a crush on was into you? She told me his name. His face came to mind, but I had no idea he had a crush on me. I was actually a bit jealous of you. But that's all in the past. I feel relieved now that I've told you, she laughed. Oh wow, this is a bit complicated. Who would have thought that the popular Helen would end up marrying the mature Chris? When Emma said that, she squinted her eyes as if reminiscing about the past. Chris and I were in the same class back in grade school. Like Emma, we had no interaction at the time. He was less than an acquaintance to me. However, at a reunion 10 years ago, Chris confessed to me. I've actually liked you since we were kids. When I heard that, I knew I wanted no one else but Chris. Even now, I'm glad we got married. Then it was time for Emma to pick up her daughter, and our tea time came to an end. After that, I visited my mother-in-law in the hospital and talked about Sarah. As expected, my mother-in-law was worried about Sarah and said, "I need to be discharged right away," and tried to move around unnecessarily. That day, since Chris is on a business trip, my father-in-law and I will handle everything. In place of my mother-in-law, we'll make sure to scrutinize her partner thoroughly. When I said that, my mother-in-law chuckled. Seeing her like that, I began to prepare for the marriage introduction with determination. Then on Saturday, Sarah brought her fiancé. Remembering the incident from last week when Sarah grabbed me by the collar and yelled at me, I shivered with fear. I had to pull myself together and manage to smile. Her fiancé was a hefty man and looked quite strong. For some reason, when he saw my face, he seemed surprised. My father-in-law and I invited them inside and asked them to take a seat. When I went to prepare some tea, I heard my father-in-law and Sarah's fiancés exchanging greetings from the living room. However, I missed hearing his name as I was busy boiling water. When I returned, I had to properly greet him. I thought about this as I made the tea and placed it on the table when I got back to the living room. That's when Sarah gave me a smug smile and said, "Mike, this woman is our housemaid. She works for us for free. Isn't that hilarious?" During our marriage introduction, saying such a thing, Sarah must be out of her mind. Even if she looks down on me, she should not express it in words. My father-in-law immediately scolded Sarah. "Sarah, that's enough. Mike, I apologize." "No, rather, Sarah, why do you call her a housemaid?" Mike, despite his appearance, spoke gently. However, he was furrowing his brows, staring at Sarah. "Well, that's what she is, right? Who would tie their hair back in a single knot nowadays? Wearing cheap clothes with jeans and an uncool apron? At least she seems to be wearing makeup, but I bet she uses cheap, non-branded makeup. She looked the same when she came last time. I can only think she's given up on looking like a woman." It looked like my father-in-law was barely holding himself back from yelling. As for Mike, he was taken aback, his face turned pale. "Don't you know? We went to the same grade school, right? When Sarah was in 7th grade, she should have been in the 9th grade. I thought everyone in the neighborhood knew that." And then my father-in-law answered, "My daughter seems to have little interest in anything other than herself. I'm sorry." Both Sarah and I were confused, not understanding what they were talking about. By chance, do you know who I am?" When I asked Mike, he smiled. "I apologize for the belated greeting. You used to be Helen Wilson before you got married, right? You might not know me, but my name is Mike. I heard my sister recently met you." "Oh, Emma, your sister was saying her brother is getting married. I never imagined it was with Sarah," I exclaimed in surprise, my voice ringing out a bit too loudly. "By the way, what does it mean that people in the neighborhood know about me? Is it because I come from a big family?" When I timidly asked that, Mike laughed and replied, "There are various reasons. Don't you know, Mrs. Wilson? You were pretty famous around here. Not just for being cute, but you also stood up to the hard-headed teachers and changed their attitude. You were student council president in middle and in high school, and the number of guys you've rejected is said to be over 300, among other tales, right?" Having heard that from Mike, I felt my body heat up in embarrassment. Surely my face must be turning bright red. "Oh, come on, what are you talking about? I knew people noticed me because I was one of 10 siblings, but I didn't do anything that great when I was a student, and I've only rejected about 5 guys who confessed their love to me. I heard from my sister that you stood up to the teachers to protect a kid with naturally blonde hair. The prejudice against them did not change immediately, but the teachers' attitudes gradually changed." Then Sarah loudly retorted, "Weren't Helen and I in different schools? I mean, I was constantly looked at with jaundiced eyes at school." My father-in-law sighed and started speaking. "Sarah, Helen was in the same school as you. Despite the softened attitude towards girls with blonde hair, you went ahead and dyed your hair even more fancy colors. Of course the teachers would get mad at that." "So if I hadn't dyed my hair, blonde hair would have been okay?" Sarah seemed shocked, but after looking down for a bit, she lifted her face, grinning in a rather creepy way. "But Helen, even though you were so active during your school days, now you're just a plain housewife. You can't even dress up fashionably. Poor thing. Taking care of your mother-in-law and doing housework must be tough. No matter what glories you had in the past, there's nothing to brag about now. That's what happens when you choose an office worker like my brother for a husband. You're really pathetic. Now, aren't I the real winner?" Sarah seemed to get more excited as she spoke, ending with a laugh. My father-in-law seemed about to retort, but I beat him to it. "That's just your opinion, isn't it? I'm very happy now. I live with a kind father-in-law and mother-in-law, and a loving husband. My mother-in-law is in the hospital now, so the house is a bit lonely, but she'll be able to be discharged in about 2 months. I'm thinking of taking good care of her, even for your share. I want her to live a long life." At my words, Sarah looked down. Besides, I'm not interested in fashion. Dressing up might make my husband happy, but it's not useful for anything else. As long as we have enough money to live, that's good enough. We were poor when I was at my parents' home. I think about the time when 12 of us lived in a small house. Compared to then, now is like heaven. Then Mike straightened up and talked to my father-in-law. Sir, I'm sorry. I originally came to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. However, after hearing Sarah's words, I've decided I don't want to marry her. Please forgive my rudeness. My father-in-law responded, From this exchange, it's clear that not many would want to marry Sarah. I won't say anything even if you call off the engagement. I'm really sorry. Mike apologized again, then stood up. Sarah, who had been rigid until now, lunged and grabbed onto Mike's leg. Hold on a minute, you're the one who proposed, aren't you? How can you talk about calling off the marriage so easily? I don't want to live with someone who treats my brother's wife like a maid and mocks her. In my home, there's my brother, his wife, and my sister. I can't stand it if my family gets hurt by you. I'll be nice to your family, that's a given. Then Mike sighed. So you switch your attitudes according to people. You look down on those you perceive as below you, and flatter those you see as above you, don't you? I regret not realizing you were such a person sooner, but now that I know, I can't love you anymore. Please let go of my hand if you understand. As Mike said that, Sarah released her grip, fell to her knees, and began to sob uncontrollably. My father-in-law and I left Sarah as she was and saw Mike out. After that, Sarah moved out of the house again. So far, whenever she had financial trouble, she would lean on my father-in-law and he would help her out. But now, given her disrespect towards my mother-in-law and treating me as a maid, he decided he wouldn't lend her money anymore, even if she begged. Apparently, Sarah is now working in a clothing store because she's too old to earn money from night jobs. However, she seems to be struggling as she can't afford to buy designer items with just her salary. No one would want to help someone who is only out for money. After being abandoned by Mike and receiving a cold shoulder from my father-in-law, Sarah went to my mother-in-law. It's appalling how she cried and begged the sick woman for money. My mother-in-law, far from worrying about her illness, was saddened when she saw Sarah crying and playing the victim. Then my mother-in-law decided to cut ties with Sarah, and since then, Sarah has not been seen. After that, my mother-in-law finally got discharged from the hospital. She needs a walking stick, and I support her body. I started to find ways to make house chores easier so that my mother-in-law could live comfortably. Then my in-laws and Chris started to express their gratitude to me. I am the one who should be grateful. You all have been a great help to me. Thank you, I said, and everyone gave warm smiles. Just that makes me feel happy. I have been keeping in touch with Emma and occasionally go out for coffee. And recently, I discovered that I'm pregnant. Everyone in the family was overjoyed, and my parents and siblings came to congratulate me one after another. I'm really happy that everyone is celebrating with me. The birth and child rearing from here on will be tough, but I want to live each day cherishing every moment.